I was super devastated from going from a situation where I didn't know if I could conceive to finally conceiving, being over the moon about it, and then finding out that my pregnancy at this point is not viable, or my child isn't gonna make it, was just a real punch to the stomach. I remember repeatedly saying, why me? I personally feel like I've been dealt my fair share of cards in life. And so to add this was what did I do to deserve such an unlucky hand?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Facing Giants, where we explore stories of struggle, strength, and resilience to encourage you in your fight against whatever giants you may be facing. Today, we will be talking with someone very near and dear to my heart, my dear, dear cousin, Danielle. Hello, Danielle.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm doing all right, thanks. Well, today we'll be talking about stillbirths and the experience around stillbirths. Another topic that I have little to no knowledge about or experience with, but I know these kinds of experiences really take people to dark places, and coming out of those dark places can be very difficult. So my first question for you, Danielle, is where are you from? Where did you grow up, and how old are you?
So I'm from Scarborough, which is in Toronto. I grew up in Scarborough as well. I'm born and raised. I'm turning 33.
Mhm. Jumping right into the topic, at what age did you know that motherhood was something you wanted to participate in?
From fairly young, when I was 15, going on 16, I was diagnosed with cancer. And from that experience, I was told, due to the type of cancer and the chemotherapy that I was taking, that there would be a potential that I wouldn't be able to conceive, or that it would be hard to conceive. So from then, there were thoughts in my mind of oh my gosh, is this something that I'm not going to be able to do? And it slowly became something that I constantly thought about, even though I was young and still growing up. It was something in the back of my mind that I was like, I love kids. I know I want to be a mom. And so it was always something that I thought about, of I want to have kids one day. Is this possible?
What does having a child mean to your life? Why would a child be valuable to you?
I know there's a lot of women out there that put a lot of emphasis on their career and are very driven by that, and career and reaching certain milestones within their career are their top priority and their focus. For me, it's always been being a mother would be the ultimate goal for me. That was the one thing that I always strived for and always hoped that I would achieve one day. Having a career and all of that is still important, and it's great, and I'm still doing what I love to do in that perspective. But I guess growing up, being the oldest, I always had a motherly instinct. My youngest brother and I are 10 years apart, and I think when he was born, not that I was forced to assume a motherly role, but it kind of happened naturally. The gap is so big that I was his second mom. I remember rocking him to sleep when he was fairly newborn, changing his diaper from very young, doing all of those things. And I think just having that older sister hat, and being in that role, I kind of just always looked forward to when I would have that chance for myself. I'm very close with my parents, so obviously, having that relationship, and just dreaming of the day when I'll be able to have cool relationships with my own kids, and do things and share memories, and mimic the childhood that I grew up with.
Yeah. Well, you just described, I can relate because I've seen that sort of thing where there's a big age gap between siblings. I think when there's a closer age gap, then you more see each other like peers.
You grew up
Um,
together, right?
right. But when you have a larger age gap, then the older sibling becomes more of a caregiver. And I think a lot of responsibilities put on them, like expectations from the parents too. And that could definitely foster a type of warmth towards the caregiving role, if
Hmm.
I were to guess. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know that you were like rocking your younger brother to sleep like that. I'm
So
gonna
I'm so
hold.
protective of him.
I know. I'm gonna hold that one over his head. Yeah. So let's fast forward to like the day you got pregnant with your first child. Describe those emotions to me, like between you and your husband. Like what was it like in the household? What was it like between the two of you, and what was it like for you personally when you discovered that you were pregnant?
We had just gotten married. We were married for maybe 4 months at this point, and we spoke about having children and starting a family pretty much right away after we got married. So we were actively trying to conceive, and those 4 months went by and nothing was happening. And so I started to get pretty emotional about it because, again, going back to my previous experience, I wasn't sure if I could even have kids. And so we were trying for these 4 months and nothing was happening. And so my mind immediately went back to that situation. I was like, oh my gosh, like, is it just not for me? Is it not in my cards? All of these like negative thoughts. So finally, when we did conceive, I didn't really have a feeling that, like this time it worked, we were pregnant, all of that. But something felt a little bit different. And I remember TMI, but like I like track my periods and all of that. So like I remember the morning I was supposed to get my period, and like I'm very on schedule, like nothing ever goes off. So I just knew like I'm supposed to get it today. If it's not here, then something is off. And so the day before, there was no like normally I have signs, and there was no signs that I was getting it. So the morning of, I woke up earlier, I snuck out of bed, went into the bathroom, and I took a pregnancy test, and I'm standing there for like 10 minutes, too chicken to like turn it around and like look at it. And then I'm like whispering like prayers in my heart, and I'm like, like if this is supposed to be, then it's gonna happen. If it's not, then I'm gonna tell Jelani, my husband, that I think we should take a pause on like actively trying and just wait to see what happens. And so that was my mindset like before I turned over the test. I turn over the test and I see two faint, like really faint lines. And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, is it really like, and so I'm standing there and I'm looking at it, and just immediately tears start to flow. Like I start bawling my eyes out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant, and blah, blah, blah. So I sneak back into bed and I'm still crying, like hysterically crying. I hug Jelani, and he hugs me back and he kisses my forehead and he's like, it's okay, we'll just keep trying. And I'm like, no, couldn't catch my breath, like hysterical. Like, you're gonna be a dad. And he's like, what? Are you serious? And it's like 7 a.m. on a Saturday. We're supposed to be getting ready for church, like, but I'm lost it at this point. And
Mhm.
so he's really happy. I'm pretty sure he cried, but I couldn't see. It's pitch black. Like,
Yeah, we'll
anyway.
edit that out.
Yes. But yeah, like that's when I found out. I was super excited. Like we were both at that point like really excited. I didn't know what the next step was going to be and like all of that, because we had up to this point we just hoped to get to this point, and now we were at that point and it's kind of like, okay, what's next?
You had gotten exactly what you were both hoping for. So,
Mhm.
especially after a little bit of a period of waiting a bit for it. I can imagine that like for a lot of couples, like the pregnancy thing doesn't happen right away.
Hmm.
And I say this all the time. Most people spend their earlier years avoiding pregnancy, thinking it's
Hmm.
so easy. And then when it's finally time for it to get done, it's, some people run into some problems, years of trying, right? So
Yep.
I can
Yep.
imagine that a few months have passed and things aren't going the way that you're expecting, how that could create some anxiety. But there you go. You got finally at a point where you got where what you were aiming for, and I can understand the excitement. So typically after a pregnancy happens, you're meeting with doctors and you're going for ultrasounds and things like that. So
Hmm.
walk me through like that process, like the process where you're now interacting with the medical system and you're starting to get a picture of what's going on inside your belly.
Yeah. So initially, like I called my family doctor and like let her know. Mind you, this is all happening during COVID. So
Hmm.
the healthcare system is already different. The landscape is different. How you interact with your doctors, go to appointments, that's all not the norm. And healthcare system is still trying to figure out, how do they handle everything? And so a lot of my early initial conversations and checkups were virtual, other than like getting blood work done or going for like my first dating ultrasound and stuff like that. But a lot of the conversations that I had were over the phone. So I remember just calling my family doctor and letting her know. And she knew that we were trying. And so she was really excited. And so she sent me for like the regular like blood work and initial like dating ultrasound, which is the first ultrasound that you do in order to find out like how far along you are and when you're potentially due and all of that. So she sent me to do all that, and so I did the blood work. Blood work came back fine. The ultrasound came back normal. The only thing that was kind of like off was that based on when my last period was and where the baby was measuring, like our days were maybe 2 or 3 days different from when my potential due date was. Nothing alarming, totally fine. Discrepancies happen all the time. So initially, that was all good. And then it was time for me to find like an OB to be followed by for the duration of my pregnancy. I could have done it with my family doctor, but just preferred to be seen by an OB, especially just given my health history. So, called around, found a fertility clinic that also, so on top of doing like being a fertility specialist, they did regular obstetric care and gynecology care. So they agreed to follow my pregnancy. So sent them my initial like blood work and ultrasound, and then they scheduled me for to do their own tests in their office. So I, like eventually, I think I was maybe 7 weeks when I initially saw them. And yeah, they became like my main caregivers at that point.
You probably wouldn't have done an ultrasound at that point, right?
I did actually. I did.
Okay.
When they saw me initially, they wanted to do their own. And so on top of the first one that I had, like the first dating ultrasound that I did, they conducted their own. I will say shortly after I became a patient in their care, I started spotting.
Hmm.
And so once I became their patient and the spotting, like spotting can be normal during pregnancy. So initially, like they weren't alarmed or anything like that, but it kept happening. And so I would do ultrasounds like every other week with them. So I was doing ultrasounds, yeah, every other week until I was about like 12 weeks.
And was there anything abnormal on these ultrasounds?
No, not initially. Initially, they were like, everything looks fine. They didn't seem concerned at all. They were just like, some women experience some bleeding, can be completely normal, could be like due to your previous health history. So they at least they didn't express to me that they were alarmed or concerned.
Okay. So at what point did you get a hint that things might be more complicated than they were seeming?
Yeah, so about 12 weeks. Around 12 weeks is when they test they do test for neurological defects, I guess, and any issues that could potentially arise with baby in terms of genetics and stuff like that. So how it works is that you do a blood test, or you do the ultrasound first. Can't remember, but you do them basically the same day, and it has to be done within like an hour of each other. And what they're measuring is the length of the baby's neck, and I honestly forget like the medical like explanation here. You probably know a lot more than I do, but they measure like the length of the baby's neck along with some rating within your blood, gives them an indication that there could be something wrong with baby, or baby could be genetically perfectly fine. So the ultrasound was perfectly normal. The measurement was in a normal range. They weren't concerned. Everything was good. Left the ultrasound, went straight to do the blood work, did my blood work, in and out, easy peasy. A couple days later, I get a call from my OB saying, the ultrasound was fine, it was perfect, but we are concerned about the levels in your blood work. And so I'm like, okay, like, what does that mean? And he's like, well, basically, the blood work is indicating that there could be something wrong. We aren't sure what it could be at this point, but the levels are indicating that there could be. So he's like, what I need you to do is, I'm going to send you for further testing. So we got set up with North York General Hospital in Toronto, and we went to see a neonatal specialist there that performed further genetic testing. And we basically did a amniocentesis, which basically checks the amniotic fluid within the sac to see basically that fluid can tell you a lot of information about baby. So they took a sample of the fluid and basically sent it to further testing. When they sent it for further testing, at first they told us that the levels were like off, and what they think it is that baby is going to have Down syndrome. And so initially, you know still a shock and still something we were not prepared for, but we were like, okay, Down syndrome is a fairly common thing. There are a lot of people in this world living with Down syndrome, and that just makes our baby even more special, and that's fine. We're just
Mm-hmm.
gonna be a family that has a baby with Down syndrome, and we're gonna get through it. We're gonna figure out how to do that. And so that was like their initial assumption. And I believe we did one more test after we did that, because they wanted to triple check everything and just make sure they were right about their diagnosis. So we did one more test, and then that test confirmed that the baby actually had a defect called triploidy, which is essentially 3 copies of chromosomes. And all of this happened fairly quickly. Well, it felt like fairly quickly, because from finding out at 12 weeks that there could potentially be something wrong, all of this was confirmed by 16 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So within a month span, it went from potential to confirmed, but still okay, we could live with it, to confirmed, this is no longer a viable pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So what they told us was that the lifespan for somebody with triploidy is very short. So I, of course, started doing my own research, and they kind of laid it out for us as the doctor that we dealt with. So at this point, once the diagnosis was confirmed, the OB that I was seeing could no longer see us because now it became a high risk pregnancy. So we got officially transferred to North York General, and we were dealing with a specialist there and their genetics department. And so what they explained to us was that there are three possible outcomes in this situation. A, you could miscarry before you get to 20 weeks. So within the next 4 weeks, you could miscarry at any point. B, you could either go close to full term or go full term and deliver this baby, but the chances of life after would be with days, like not long at all. Or C, go full term, deliver, and the child could live potentially by some miracle for maybe a year, two max. But those situations were highly unlikely. Every situation that I was reading up on and the scenarios that the doctor knew of was that the woman miscarried before 20 weeks.
What was going through your head when you guys heard this news? How did you take the news?
I was super devastated from going from a situation where I didn't know if I could conceive to finally conceiving, being over the moon about it, and then finding out that like my pregnancy at this point is not viable, or like my child isn't going to make it, was like just like a real like punch to the stomach. I remember repeatedly saying, like, why me? I personally feel like I've been dealt my fair share of cards in life. And so to add this was like, what did I do to deserve such an unlucky hand? How is this happening? And it just really sucked. Not only were we like in our first couple months, year of marriage and like navigating that dynamic, but now you've thrown probably one of the biggest tests that a marriage could, go through. And so it was hard, and it's COVID. So you're already like secluded from a lot of things. The world is like in a weird space. It sucked. And I feel like my husband he was trying to be strong for the two of us. And like initially, I like finding out initially, I was like done for. Like I was a wreck. And he was like holding it down for us, like, trying to be strong. And I think as weeks went by, I don't know how or where we found the strength, but we both got to a place where like, okay, this is the situation, we're gonna get through this the best we know how. And we kind of just went through each day like, it is what it is. Like we're just gonna take literally each day as it comes. But it did suck. We weren't really telling anybody at that point either what was going on. So I was visibly pregnant, and the world was starting to open up a little bit. So you were starting to see people again, and people were noticing. And so it was this weird, awkward situation of on the outer trying to be really excited and really happy that you're pregnant, and people coming up to you and being like, oh my gosh, like, congrats, like, so happy for you. But you knowing deep down what's going on, and the fact that you're literally a ticking time bomb, walking on eggshells, and trying to like keep that bottled in and still outwardly be really happy, be really excited. So we literally didn't tell anybody except for like our immediate family, for a very long time, because it was like, well, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 hours from now. Like, I could miscarry at any point. So that was like the hardest part of just literally not knowing what's going to happen and when.
For sure. Prior to this, did you know anyone who miscarried or had a stillbirth or anything, or went through
No.
something similar to you? And that's the thing, right? Like, I think so many people, like, this is a lot more common than you would think.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know what the rates for stillbirths are, but I know that miscarriages, up to 1 in 4 pregnancies are miscarried,
Hmm.
which is like, with
It's
the amount of
wild.
kids being born, like there's
Yep.
a lot more miscarriages going on than we're aware of.
Hmm.
But I'm not surprised that you felt kind of awkward about your circumstance, because one, people don't talk about it. It's not something you share openly. And on the other hand, you probably didn't know what was going on yourself either. You didn't know the trajectory of your pregnancy. Well, you probably knew how it was going to end, but you didn't know there's a lot of missing details.
Right.
That must have been hard, especially given how excited you were when you found out you were pregnant. I could imagine like the equal and opposite reaction when you found out it wasn't going to be uh, what you thought it was going to be. Considering how the medical professionals knew how this was going to end, did you feel like there was a bit of pressure pushing you in one direction over another? Because you had outlined 3 options.
Hmm.
And I'll get you to tell me which one you picked soon, but I'm curious if you felt there was pressure from the system or maybe people you would talk to pursue one route versus another.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we got transferred to North York General and we were seeing a specialist there. And he was the one that basically outlined those 3 options. When he outlined those 3 options, he indirectly told us that we should terminate the pregnancy. He was like, I don't think you're going to get past 24 weeks, if you even get it to 24 weeks. And you might as well quit while you're ahead. Make it easier on yourself. You'll have more time to recover. Then you can try again a lot sooner. And how they explained the situation was that it was a fluke. There was nothing that either Jelani or I could have done or not done. So the comfort of knowing that our next pregnancy would be normal and fine was their way of saying, cut it short, grieve and heal with this part, and go on to trying again to have a successful pregnancy. And I remember I went to that appointment alone and hearing him basically tell me to terminate the pregnancy. I was sitting there like, A, did he really just say that to me? B, is that allowed? And C, like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, I don't know what to do. But yeah, we were pushed to terminate,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you how that made you feel. So you already answered that question. Why do you think you felt that way? Like, what was the underlying assumption or premises that you were going off of that made you so confused by that offering?
So, how we were looking at it was they laid out these 3 options. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And so, similarly to us initially thinking that, okay, the baby would have Down syndrome and we would figure it out and deal with it and adapt, our minds were going to the best possible scenario, which to us, even though it would have still sucked, would have been to get full term and to at least hold our baby, see his or her eyes, love on them for however short of a period that is. And that was what we were hoping for. That's where we wanted to get to. And so the hope and the possibility of that was what was driving us to think about all these options, think about what they were telling us, and be like, you're not God. You don't hold a crystal ball. You don't know what's going to happen when I leave this hospital and get in my car. You don't know what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. And so just the fact that there were 3 possible scenarios was like, I'm going to take whatever this doctor is telling me with a bit of grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. I find that very commendable. And it's one of the main reasons why I felt you had a really compelling and interesting story, because in my own estimation, and who am I and what do I know, but it seems like the path of least resistance and the path where there'd be the least grief, would be to terminate the pregnancy and, quote unquote, as you said, quit while you're ahead. But it seemed like you intentionally knew that with time came more attachment. And regardless of that, you were still willing to allow nature to take its course, and whatever came, came. But it seemed like the priority was the attachment with this child. Now,
Yeah.
nowadays, like the value of an unborn baby is so up in the air right now. And we're not here to discuss where we stand on what, and we're not going to defend or argue anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I just find it interesting that to some people, an unborn child could have so little value that termination, even if there's nothing wrong, is an option.
Mm-hmm.
And the other spectrum of that is an unborn child has so much value that they're seen as equal to anyone who is outside the womb. Like they're accepted as inherently human and
Mm-hmm.
should be treated as such. So I thought it was very courageous that, given the current climate that we're in, you still chose to take the hard route, the emotionally difficult route. And I commend you for that. From the people that did know what was going on, did you feel like people in your circle were kind of ambivalent to which direction you went and were just kind of whatever you decide? Or did you feel that even within your circle that people were encouraging you to take one route over another?
A bit of both. I think when we told our family initially what was going on with baby and what the possible outcomes were, some family members were like, why put yourself through that? Just terminate. You guys can grieve and you guys can move on and try again, similarly to the doctor. Other family members were like, do whatever you feel is best type of situation. And then others didn't know how to feel or what to say or how to express themselves and kind of were just like, whatever you guys decide, we're just going to stick by you. And that's just that. So it was a bit of everything from different people. It was hard having those conversations regardless, and like having to kind of put that weight on other people, on our immediate family, of like, we were all so excited, and now here's the kicker. Actually, it's not going to be what we thought. And now we're faced with this tough decision. And whatever decision we make, there's still going to be an outcome that we don't know of that's going to affect us all. Mostly Jelani and I, but still going to have some ripple effect on everybody else.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was a bit of both.
Mm-hmm. So from the sounds of it, you decided to let nature take its course and see how this thing was going to play out, for good, for bad, or for ugly. It didn't matter.
Yep.
How far did this baby go?
Yeah. So once we decided that we were going to stick with the pregnancy and just let nature do its course, whatever God had planned is what was going to be. I actually requested to leave the care of Northrop General and move to Mount Sinai, which is downtown Toronto, and they are known for high-risk pregnancies and preterm births and neonatal issues. Like, they are like the number one hospital in the city for such things. So I demanded to be moved because I didn't appreciate the doctor telling me what to do, what I should have done.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got moved to a new caregiver who was absolutely amazing. Like, so sympathetic. The first thing he said to me when I met him was, I don't hold a crystal ball. I understand the previous doctor told you wouldn't get to 24 weeks, but looking at your results, looking at your tests, I can't tell you what's going to happen. And so I'm willing to do everything that I would normally do in pregnancy follow-up for you if you guys are willing to fight. And that for us was so reassuring. So we saw him every 2 weeks, and I got to 33 weeks. And unfortunately, she didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
Went for a checkup, normal routine checkup like I normally would. This was the first checkup I went to by myself since being transferred to Mount Sinai. First checkup, I drove myself, went by myself, all of that. Laid down on the bed, and the tech started the ultrasound, and she was going at it for a little bit, like moving the wand around. And maybe 5-7 minutes in, she was like, I'm so sorry, but I don't see a heartbeat. And at first I was like, what? It's
Mm-hmm.
not even possible. Like, I'm pretty sure I felt, at this point we knew what we were having. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure I felt her move this morning. Like, there's no way. And she like checked again. She's like, I'm so sorry. She's like, I'm going to give you a moment. And I literally was just left there on the bed looking up, like, what is actually happening right now? My husband's at work. I'm down here by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what to process, like what to do, what to say, like how to feel. And again, like, we knew this was a possibility, but we had gotten so far that I was like, there's no way. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way God's going to bring us through all of that to get to almost full term for the whole thing to just crash and burn and be over with within a second. Like, there's no way.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our minds, like, leading up to that, we got to like 6 months, and that's when like we officially kind of told the world. Like, I posted it on Instagram, like, we were out there with pregnancy, because at this point, like, there was no denying I was pregnant and the world was open again. So I would see people, and again, it was like I had to tell people, like, there wasn't any shying away from it at this point. So to do all that, I also felt a little stupid in a way, because the other part, like, so in that moment, I was like, what's happening? But then I was like, Danielle, you knew this was a possibility. And then my mind went to, you're an idiot. You set yourself up for this disaster because you knew this was a possibility. You still got overly excited, shared probably way too much information with people the whole world knows. And
Mm-hmm.
now you have to like backpedal and retract and explain to people. So like my mind was just going through so many different things. And at this point, I hadn't seen the doctor yet. They hadn't discussed what the next steps were. So I was literally just lying there. I was calling Jelani. He didn't answer initially. I called my mom. She didn't answer initially. So I'm literally just laying there like, What
Alone with
the
this
heck?
news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Well, what got you this far in the first place was your optimism for the whole thing.
Hmm.
The optimism that things are going to work out in the best way possible that it could work out.
Hmm.
In doing that, it left room to be disappointed still, which is probably what got you as far as you did in the journey, just that optimism, right? I think it's kind of weird that you just like told you dropped the bomb and just like, I'm gonna leave now. Just kind of walked out.
Yeah, literally. I guess also because I guess it's awkward for her, right? It's like she's just
Yeah.
an ultrasound tech. She wasn't my doctor at all. She's not like his nurse. She's not like anything. She literally was just doing the ultrasound. So for her, it's kind of like I have to give this lady the most horrible news ever. It probably ruined her day too. It was awkward, but like how else would you handle that type of situation? Like,
Hmm.
I'm a complete stranger to you. Would you have hugged me? Would you like what is there to say to me? Like,
When I caught wind of the happenings, I didn't know what to say to you, and it's hard to know what to say to someone who's going through something like this because
mhm,
you don't know where they're at with it. And it could have been months, it could have been years after. You still don't know where they're at with it, if they're even in a
yeah.
position to still like to talk about it or what they can talk about. So
Mhm.
I think even most people would have wanted to ask but just didn't know if you were ready for it. And I thought it was cool because I did see that Instagram post, because you even posted another one after, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. But that told me that like you were, as painful as it was, you were handling it in a healthy way. So
Mhm.
anyway, backtracking to you and this lady in the room, it's a very difficult thing for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're not the first person. If this is her profession, you're not the first person she broke this news to. But you know, as a nurse, I've had many people die in my care, and you never get used to something like that. So yeah, that's devastating, and it's it must have been extra hard that you felt like you were alone for as long as you were. So that must have made it even harder. What was the plan at this point? Because you probably talked to a doctor after this.
After I had gathered my thoughts, I was probably in the room. Jelani called me back like shortly after, like so it was fine. But after I initially had that conversation with him, broke the news to him, and we spoke, I gathered my thoughts, my composure, and they asked me to meet the doctor back in his office. So, grabbed my stuff, walked back over, and I was literally just sitting in the office, just blank, like completely
Mm-hmm.
like. And
Numb.
he came in, and he's like, "I'm so sorry. Like, it's not what we had hoped or planned for, but we all knew that this could be a possibility." And so called Jelani back, put him on speaker, and at this point, he's kind of walking us through the next 24 to 48 hours and kind of explaining what we'll need to do and how we'll need to process everything. So I got put on medication, a couple different medications. One was to kind of, my body at that point, we don't know how long it had been from when she stopped breathing or her heart stopped to the time that I had the ultrasound. So at that point, his like first concern was like to ensure that my body knew that she had passed. So it stopped producing all the extra stuff that it normally would to keep baby. So I got put on some medication to like ensure my breast milk didn't come in. I got put on medication to kind of start the transition of decomposition, I guess, in a way.
What's
Uh,
decomposition?
so I still had to, because I was so far along, I still actually had to give birth. Because my water hadn't broken, there was no sign of needing to go into labor, I kind of had to trick my body into like
Right.
getting into that like process frame of mind. So he had put me on like a medication that I had to take, and it was basically to prepare my body for the act of labor and start to just encourage like things to start moving in that direction and to basically keep her and everything else intact until I did deliver, because they didn't want to happen is like my water to break prematurely, like before I was actually ready to like get her out or deliver her. They didn't want, essentially, like she did a bit. Her body started to like shrivel up, essentially. So there was medication to like stop like the decomposition of that, like her body like happening. Yeah, so it was just like a lot of medication prep and then actually scheduling to go into the hospital to get induced to deliver. And so this was like a Wednesday, and by I think the Sunday I was admitted, induced, and delivered her.
Yeah, there's something like metaphorical about that. The experience of that must have been so, let's just use difficult,
Hmm.
because labor and delivery require so much effort. And I think in life we have this subconscious association with effort and product. Like if something is hard, like pregnancy, labor, delivery, you're going to get this
The
product that
reward.
makes it all worth it. And then with your case, it's like you did the pregnancy, labor, delivery, and then the product was, on one hand, a baby who had passed, but on the other hand, as you had described it earlier, it was a baby you could hold. Because I've heard you describe it that regardless if she was alive or dead, when she came, she was still your baby and you were still her parents. So bittersweet, probably more bitter than sweet, but that's kind of the metaphor that I was envisioning. What were your sentiments when you were holding her?
So, as you said, it was kind of like finally, finally, I get to see you. I can hold you. There's proof that all of this was real, and, we actually created life. And just knowing that she did have a heartbeat and she was growing, like, she came out perfectly fine. She was small, she was on the small side, which we knew was going to happen, but she looked, felt like a baby. She was a baby. So being able to just hold her and kiss her little hands and her feet and just know that like we created her was surreal. It was very rewarding in a very strange way, and gratifying in a strange way. I was fine up until we had to actually leave the hospital. I cried here and there while we were there, but the reality of the situation didn't actually hit us until we were leaving. As we were leaving the hospital, there was another family leaving at the same time, and they were leaving with car seat, with baby, and we were leaving empty-handed, and I lost it. That was like the I think throughout the whole thing, the hardest part for me was
Mm-hmm.
that reality actually set in. And as you said, I was going home with no proof of any fight, any situation. Like it was done. Like we left the
Mm-hmm.
hospital and like it was like nothing happened. Like I had this mom body now that was changed because of her. I was experiencing the highs and the lows of postpartum. My body was doing weird things, trying to like adjust and figure out what to do, what not to do. And at the end of the day, we came home to a very quiet house. So that was like the hardest part. And I think that was the hardest part for Jelani as well, because I remember him saying to me, like, I just watched you go through maybe the hardest thing you'd ever have to do, like the labor, the contractions, the pushing, the like all the actual labor and delivery part. And he's like, I feel bad for you because you have no reward. You have nothing to prove for it.
Again, like such a tough, unusual position to be in. And again, I say unusual, but I would bet that this happens way more
Mm-hmm.
than we can appreciate. And I bet there's way more people out there that are struggling presently or have struggled with something like this that haven't really opened up to anyone and talked about. So I imagine it was very difficult. Once you recovered psychologically, emotionally from the experience, I understand that there were some celebrations that you had for Harlow. Why was it important to, well, what were the celebrations like? How did you go about showing the world that this child was significant to you, and why was it important that you did that?
Yeah, so because we got so far along in the journey, by law, once you get over 20 weeks, the hospital basically gives your baby over to you. So it's up to you to decide how you'd like to dispose of his or her body. If it's under 20 weeks, they handle it and they just have like a cremation service, and not service, but basically the hospital handles it. But because she was over that, we had the opportunity to do that for her. And so we had a small, very intimate service with literally probably just like our family. We had a small funeral service for her. And then we ended up cremating her. We didn't have like any sort of celebration with family or any like repast or anything that you would normally have at a funeral. We kind of just wanted to be by ourselves. So we did that and then kind of just went home. And then in October, my sister and her now husband said that they were going to take a trip to Dominican Republic for her birthday. And I was like, you know what? I need a trip. I need to like get away. I need to like clear my mind. And so we went on that trip, Jelani and I, and it was just a week of healing, really. We spent, even though my sister and her husband were on the trip together, like it was mostly like Jelani and I just finding moments of just being still together, just finally processing what had happened, what we went through, remembering her. I did a lot of journaling and writing. And it was just a time of like solitude and like finally getting to a place where like, okay, I can openly talk about this. I can openly share without like completely breaking down. I'm still at a point where like I'll still, even now, I'll still tear up. But it was a point where we were like, okay, we're finally ready to like open up to the world and like share our story. And in that came healing in itself, like finally talking about it and connecting with other mothers also that went through similar situations and stories, and finding a new village in that, like that also helped. But those were like the two main ways that we celebrated her.
That's great. I think it's great that you took the time to to heal from it. I don't think we take enough time to heal. Everyone goes through trauma, every single person. You show me a person, I'll show you someone who's experienced trauma.
Hmm.
But not enough of us take the time to be present with our trauma and make sure that we've come to terms with it and recovered from it. So it's great, and I think it's necessary what you did there in taking some time to recoup and recover. Because one big indication of if you've dealt with your trauma is if you're able to talk about it. And just the simple fact that you're willing to share it today has told me that your experience is occupying a healthy place in your life right now, that you're using it as a building opportunity as opposed to something that's going to forever weigh you down, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, so that's fantastic. And it's also good to give each other the opportunity to hear the other's perspective, because you can
Hmm.
physically go through something together, but it doesn't mean you necessarily understand how they experienced it. So,
Absolutely.
so that's another thing why I think that was probably as effective as it was.
Yeah.
Um,
On that trip is like Jelani was very quiet about how he felt throughout this whole thing. Again, I think he was trying to be a lot more supportive for me because he felt like it was my body going through all the changes. It was me who had to like physically deal with everything. So I think he felt like I was bearing more than he was, even though we were going through it together. And so he kept a very strong front majority of the time. And that trip was the first time that he completely like broke his silence in a way and expressed just how angry he was about what had happened and how unlucky he felt about the situation.
mhm.
So, yeah, it was a needed time for sure.
Yeah. How does this experience still affect you today, or affect you both today?
It's crazy because she'd be 2.5 right now.
Do you find yourself always counting, like keeping
Yeah.
track? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always thinking about like what would she be doing right now? What milestones would she be hitting? Like how would what would our family dynamic look like right now if that hadn't been the situation? We have an urn for her, which we keep in our other daughter's room, Harley. We keep it in her room. It's it's very interesting because the last couple of weeks, every morning I wake her up, she points at it. And I'm like, yeah, sissy. And then she'll like go about her day. Like it will just be like this thing that just happens literally every morning and then it's like overdone and done with.
Mhm.
And we celebrate her birthday every year. We still try and like do something. Yeah, like she's just always in our thoughts. But yeah, she's just always on our minds. Like we're always thinking about her every so often. Like I'll go through my pictures of when I was pregnant with her and like the pictures that we took of her at the hospital. Jelani has like a really big tattoo of her and him on his forearm. So like I see that every day. So like she's always around. Like we have the program for her funeral up on the fridge and it just stays there. She's always in our thoughts. Like we're
Mhm.
always thinking about her.
Yeah, well, what you've done in going this route was you were sure to be intentional that she mattered.
Mhm.
And I think once you do that, she just cements herself in your life, and she will always be a part of your life, even though she's not here. Just like anyone who's lost a grandfather or a parent or lost anyone really, they continue to be a part of our lives even though they're not physically here. So I think it's meaningful that you do that, especially in a climate where it seems like unborn children aren't as valuable as some would argue they should be. So as you mentioned, you currently have a daughter, and I'm curious how this previous experience played into your discovery of a new pregnancy, or even like the decision to try again? Were you intentional about trying again for another child? And what made you so courageous to try again, knowing that the past wasn't telling you that this was something that was going to be easy for you?
Hmm. So Harley Ray, she's 15 months. We got pregnant 6 months after having Harlow. And after we took that trip in October and we had finally found peace and we were kind of at a point of acceptance with what had transpired, I we both were, but I think I was pushing it more. Was like, I need to have another child. In a weird way, it I felt like I needed to fill that that void that I was feeling. And so I was like, babe, we gotta start trying. Like I need this. I felt like I needed Harley to fully heal. Like I was at a good point, but I felt like I needed her to kind of I was at like 75%. I needed her to get me to that full 100.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just something that because I knew I wanted to be a mom, and Harlow made me that. Like at that point, you couldn't tell me I wasn't a mom and that, I didn't experience motherhood, even though it didn't look like everybody else's. But I felt like I owed it to myself, I guess, to try again. And I knew Jelani wanted a child as well. And like, that's something we always spoke about. And so for us, it was kind of like, we're not going to push this, but we will try, but not try. And so, whatever happens, happens. And that's exactly what happened. We tried, but didn't try and ended up conceiving. And yeah, it was 6 months after. And initially, I was like, here we go again. Like, we're doing this. Are we really ready for this? And so I was pretty anxious, especially like those first like 3-4 months, because that was the time period that I had found out that everything was what was going on with Harlow. And so those 4 first months of being pregnant with Harley, I was like on edge. Like every little thing, I was like calling my doctor for it. We did a special test called NIPT, which basically it's a blood test, but it basically flags for the risk of any genetic abnormalities or potential issues that could arise with baby. So I was like, we're doing that test because I need to know off the bat if there's something wrong. And I remember once we did it, and it also tells you like what you're having, like the sex of the baby. So I remember when we did it, the first thing we found out was like everything was okay, everything like looked normal, and I was like, okay, thank God. And then I found out it was a girl, and I was like, okay, another girl. And I was also, before finding out this, very worried that like we we would try again, we would get pregnant, and that I wouldn't have an opportunity to be a girl mom. And so when we found out that it was a girl, I was like super excited. I was like, this is my opportunity again. Like at least like finally I get an opportunity to be a girl mom. We were very excited, but it was very, very nerve-wracking at the same time, just thinking about the what if. And because of what we had experienced, it opened our eyes to literally everything that could potentially go wrong within a pregnancy, because there's so many things that could happen. And so in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, she's fine for the genetic stuff, but like, God forbid, what if, what if, what if? And that kept creeping into my mind every so often. And then we got to a point where I was pretty much full term. And then it settled in like, oh snap, we're actually doing this again. In less than however many weeks, we're actually going to have a baby for like in real life to hold, to carry home. Are we actually ready for this? But it was a scary time, but a very exciting time and very rewarding and definitely what we needed for sure.
Mhm. Now, you've mentioned God a few times in this talk, and it's obvious just from this talk that there's a spiritual undertone to this experience. And I'm curious, what impact spiritually did this experience have on you?
Hmm. So initially, I was, as I said, like super angry. Like, why me? I felt like I was, I would say, I lived a decent Christian life. I tried to like be the best person I could be, follow the good book as much as I could. And then this happened, and I was kind of like, for real? Like, why? But then once we continued on with the pregnancy, I found like renewed strength almost in my faith, especially after we got to like that 24 mark where, and the doctor told us we wouldn't. I was like, God's got this in the bag. Like, He is going to make it so that at least the second scenario would happen. We would get to full term. I would at least get to hold her, see her eyes open, like, even if I'm holding her when she takes her last breath. Like, that was where I thought we were getting to. And so I found renewed strength at that point, and praying every day. I would wake up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and like it was again during COVID, so I was a part of this like Zoom like women's devotional group. We would have devotion, and I had like a prayer corner in our room, and I had like a bunch of stickies and a bunch of verses, and like I was like fully embracing the fact that he was going to take full control of the situation and that I didn't have to worry. And my husband didn't grow up with a faith background like I did. And so I was holding down that part of our relationship for the both of us. And then I slowly started to see that like rub off on him, and him like embrace and like believe and like trust and all of the things. And then when we lost her, it sucked because I saw that light immediately go out in him, and it hasn't been the same since. And so for me, because I know what I've already been through and then going through that situation, I know that there's light on the other side. I know that for whatever reason, there was a reason we went through that. Whether it was just simply to make our marriage the strongest it could ever be, whether, I don't know, for whatever reason. And so I think because of previous experiences, I've held on to the faith that that situation happened for a reason. I'm probably never going to know why, but I have to hold on to the fact that there was a bigger plan at play, and keep that faith and keep the grounding for our family.
Another way of thinking of it, if you're not God inclined, is that every hardship presents opportunities.
Hmm.
Like let's say you're late for work, your car breaks down, and now you have to walk to work. But even in walking to work, there's an opportunity. Or many public speakers who have like lost their arm or lost a son to a drunk driver, lost a child to a stillbirth, become
Hmm.
public figures and they go on to help other people. So I think what you're saying is that even as hard as and difficult as this was, there was still something useful that you could take away from it and turn into strength for yourself moving forward.
Hmm.
And I think with every hardship, it's important to view them as stepping stones to building the better you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to shift gears a bit because I'm sure other people have things they got to do with their day and whatever. But I'm curious now that you have your daughter and now that things are going the way that they're going, like, what does it mean to you and Jelani now that you have this child tearing up your house and keeping you up at night or whatever it is she's doing? What does she mean to you?
So I don't like to say this, but in my mind, if I'm being honest, this is how I feel. I feel because of the situation that we went through. This sounds so bad. It's going to sound so bad. But because of what we went through, I feel like we have such a deep appreciation for parenthood and for her. I'm not going to say more than some people, but like she is literally our everything. The world stops with her. And so, as tired as we may be, as messy as the house is, as I'm looking around right now, as chaotic as life is right now with a 15-month-old, I don't think either of us would have it any other way. Like, this is what we hoped, dreamed, prayed for. And now that we finally have that little person, it's it's amazing. Like when I wake her up every morning, or when we wake her up in the mornings, just seeing her smile and like knowing that like she loves us unconditionally. There's no wrong that we can do, at least for right now. And she's our sole responsibility. She's our gift. She's literally everything. We love her. It's such an amazing feeling. I'm so grateful. Like I'm really grateful to have her.
Yeah. Yeah. You were saying it would sound so bad, but it doesn't. It doesn't. And here's why. There's another, I don't want to say it means more to you, but there's just an extra layer of appreciation that you have for that gift, right? Like she was
Yeah.
literally the answer to your prayers.
Hmm.
So I don't think you sound as crazy as maybe you think you do. I wouldn't say that you appreciate her more than how others would appreciate their kids, but there's that layer, that added layer to it for sure. I'll have one more question for you. If you had a message for someone, what lesson has this experience taught you that you could possibly pass on to someone who would be struggling, not necessarily with a pregnancy related struggle, but just struggles in general?
So I think it sounds a little bit cliche to say. And definitely in the moment, it's harder to accept this and to see this. But the phrase or the saying that this too shall pass, I don't believe, at least, that hard times last forever. I feel like you go through seasons of life that challenge you, that motivate you, that propel you into other seasons or different situations in life. And I feel like when you're at your lowest possible point and you don't see a way out or the light at the end of the tunnel or the what's next, it's very easy to stay down, stay depressed, stay angry, stay sad. And I find if you stay in those emotions eventually consume you and get the best of you and take over. And then that adds like a gray film over how you see everything in life. Versus if you are to take whatever situation you are in at that moment, appreciate it for what it is. Be angry, be sad, be unmotivated, be whatever you need to be in that moment, but don't allow that moment to keep you in that moment. Try your hardest. It's so hard and it's easier said than done, and honestly, my techniques aren't going to be the same that work for you or for anybody else. But like journaling, talking about your experience. If it's somebody, if it's a loss, like remembering the good times, remembering that person, like those things helped me to get out of that season of depression and to be able to be like, okay, this sucked. This happened, but I'm not going to allow this situation to dictate the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years of my life, or even months of my life. Like, I'm going to appreciate it for what it is. And I'm going to dig deep and really try to see life in a positive lens and try my hardest to get out of this funk. But I think the longer you stay down and depressed in something, the more it consumes you. And once it consumes you, like, it's harder to dig out of.
Beautifully said. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a time where people need to grieve and people need to hurt and people need to feel the pain of what loss or struggle they've gone through. Like, that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But that grieving and pain, you can't allow it to be indefinite. It'll take energy. Like
Yeah.
the natural direction of the momentum is to keep you down and to keep you hurt and to keep you wallowing, but it requires energy to pull yourself out of that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
why people end up there in those dark places is they don't see a picture of a future that is actually better than where they are. But that's the reality. Like, it's so possible to create a future for yourself, regardless of the hurt that you went through, that is better than where you currently are.
Yeah.
And you're a living testament to that. And it looks like you guys are doing well. You have a beautiful family. You just added a dog.
Crazy.
We'll talk about that another episode. But yeah, thanks for sharing, and thanks for the lessons, because in this day and age, I think especially the place unborn children hold in our society, I personally think they're drastically undervalued.
Mm-hmm.
But your story is a beautiful one in that you really made an effort in loving, mothering, supporting, and making room for this unborn child, regardless of their quote unquote destiny. Thanks for the courage you've displayed in sharing your story. And I am sure many people can learn and grow from your experience.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciated the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah,
So.
no problem. When you started crying there, I almost watered up a little bit. Yeah, I've always wanted to
Sorry.
ask you. But I just never knew where you were at. You know what? Before I end, I meant to do
Mm-hmm.
this. I'm just going to read what you wrote because I thought it was pretty beautiful. And it just sums up so well your attitude and your approach to the whole situation. I don't know when the last time you read this, so uh, here we go. So you said, I carried, labored, and birthed pure love, and not having life's only valid expression present here with us makes this even more painful. You have changed us in ways we can't even begin to describe, showed us a love that we couldn't have dreamt of, gave us a hope that we will now carry throughout life. You, Harlow, made us mommy and daddy. I just thought that was so beautiful. Anyway, thank you so much, Danielle, and I hope to see you soon.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening and for supporting the show. Stay tuned for more empowering stories. If you have any questions for the guests or feedback for the show, email them to facinggiantspodcast@gmail.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well.